Today's message is called The Fate of the Seven Churches in the End Time. This is a very important message because your faith is dependent on what kind of church you belong to. Now, most of you may have heard of the seven churches in the book of Revelation. Now, those churches actually existed at the time of writing, but they don't exist anymore. Now, does that mean those messages for those particular churches only and it doesn't apply to us? No, I don't believe that. I believe that Jesus left those messages in the Bible for us living in end time, because if you understand the messages to those seven churches, you will find out that all the churches in the end time are represented by those seven churches. Those seven churches can be categorized into three groups. The first group is these five churches: the Church of Ephesus, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, and Laodicea. So these are the churches that Jesus rebukes, and they are destined to go into the Great Tribulation. And 5 out of 7 is like, I believe that symbolizes that this group represents most of the churches that are in the end time. So most of the churches right now fall into this group. And there are two remaining churches in the book of Revelation. One is Smyrna Church and one is Philadelphia Church. And the Smyrna Church represents the second group, and this is a church that Jesus didn't find any fault, and the church was told that it would go into the Great Tribulation. And the last group, which is represented by the Church of Philadelphia, this church, Jesus promised them that they are the faithful church, so it won't go through the Great Tribulation. So those are the seven churches. And first I'm going to explain about the first group. The first group of churches, the five churches, they did a lot of things right, but there are one or two things that Jesus rebukes them for, and the most prevalent sin of these churches is the sin of sexual immorality. Something has to do with sexual in nature. And if you look at the churches today, that's exactly what's happening. Now, in most of the mainstream churches today, most of the members are living in sins of sexual immorality. It's because most of the church members are hesitating to follow Jesus, so they don't have the power of Jesus against temptation. Most of them are living a sinful lifestyle. I was talking to one of the deacons in the church I was attending to at the time, and he was saying 99% of men in the church, they are living in sins of sexual immorality. These churches are destined to go into the Great Tribulation. to understand why they are destined to go into the Great Tribulation, you have to understand the purpose of the Great Tribulation. One of the main purposes of the Great Tribulation is to save a lot of souls in the end time. Most of the church members are hesitating to follow Jesus. They hesitate to deny themselves, to live for Jesus, and because of that, they don't have the power of Jesus, and they're not born again, and they are living in a sinful lifestyle. But in the Great Tribulation, in that short period of time before Jesus returns, they will have to decide something they will have put off until the end of their lives. They have to decide to pledge their loyalty to Jesus in the face of death and the hellish tortures. So in the Great Tribulation, they're gonna decide right away to serve Jesus even in the face of death. So when they decide, they will be born again as a true follower of Jesus Christ, so they are saved. So that's one of the main purposes of Great Tribulation, to save a lot of souls before Jesus returns. So because most of these churches today, most of the members of the churches are not saved because they hesitate to follow Jesus. So God will put them through the Great Tribulation, which is the testing period, to test their loyalty and their faith. So God will put them through this Great Tribulation and find out which are the true follower of Jesus Christ to save them. So that's why these churches will go into the Great Tribulation. And if you look around these days, most of the churches are totally set up to go into the Great Tribulation because of a lot of tragedies that happen because of the cults and heretic sects. They have really negative perception about running away from Great Tribulation, and they don't even want to talk about the end time matters. And because of the wrong doctrine about the timing of the rapture, they don't even worry about the Great Tribulation. They think they will be raptured. They believe will be raptured before Great Tribulation, or they believe they have to endure Great Tribulation no matter what, because they believe either pre-tribulation rapture or the post-tribulation rapture. If you find out more about the timing of the rapture, you can watch my other video called The End Time Truth, Timing of Rapture. And if you read about the Church of Thyatira, Revelation chapter 2, verse 22, it says here, "Indeed, I will cast her into a sickbed, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of their deeds." So these churches are set up to go into the Great Tribulation. So you have to check yourself what kind of church you belong to. And the next group of the churches are represented by the Church of Smyrna. The Church of Smyrna is one of the only two churches that are not rebuked by Jesus, but they are foretold that they will be persecuted in the tribulation. It says here, Revelation chapter 2 verse 10, "Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." Although it doesn't specifically say they will go into the great tribulation, but it does talk about them being thrown into the tribulation and put into prison. And Jesus says to them, "Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." Now, it says, "You will have tribulation 10 days." Now, I believe what it means is that although the Great Tribulation is 3.5 years long, but I think this group of churches will be allowed to do the God's work in the Great Tribulation. Maybe they'll do the underground operation, and then they will be able to perform those operations, but eventually a lot of them will be caught and will be persecuted. So that's why it says here they will have tribulation for 10 days, not 3.5 years. But if you go into the Great Tribulation, you have to be prepared to be persecuted, even unto death. So that's why it says, "Be faithful until death." So these groups of churches, although they are faithful churches, these churches are destined to go into the Great Tribulation to do God's work, because there are still those who needs to be saved during the Great Tribulation. So these churches will carry out God's tasks inside the Great Tribulation. If you look around, there are a lot of churches coming up. They have a sound doctrine about the salvation, but they are misled about the end time. So these churches, they don't care about the end time matters, because they believe like pre-tribulation rapture. So they what they're saying is just be prepared to meet Jesus, to be prepared for the rapture before the Great Tribulation. So they say, don't worry about the Great Tribulation. They are right now set up to go into the Great Tribulation. And the last group of churches that are represented by the Philadelphia church, Jesus promised them, Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, "Because you have kept my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial, which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth." So the trial which shall come upon the whole world is the Great Tribulation, and as I explained before, this is given to test those who dwell on the earth, to test their faithfulness to Jesus, to save them. And Jesus promises this church that He will keep this church from the Great Tribulation. Why? Because it says here, "Because you have kept my command to persevere." Because most of the church members of this church are the faithful ones, true follower of Jesus Christ. So God already knows They don't have to be tested in the Great Tribulation. So because God knows their faithfulness already, so God doesn't want these believers, these followers and their family, the little ones, God doesn't want them to suffer in the Great Tribulation needlessly. So God will keep them from the hour of trial. Those were the three groups of churches that will be in the end time. Now, if you understand this message, then you can check yourself what kind of church you belong to right now. And most of the churches that are present now fall into the first group. And so what can you do about it? Now, if you realize this truth, then you have several options. First, you have to ask God's guidance, what you should do in the coming days, in the end time. If you love your church, and if you want to spread this message to the fellow Christians you love, then you can talk to them and you can talk to your pastor about this matter. But usually church leaders, they hardly change their mind. You can try to talk to them, but unless the church leader changes his beliefs and changes his doctrine, the church will not change. And if you try that and it doesn't work out, then you can ask God's guidance. He might lead you to join another church that belongs to the third group, represented by the Philadelphia church, or he might lead you to start another church to fulfill the task of the Philadelphia church. Whatever the course you might take, you have to ask God's guidance in the end time. And another thing I want to talk about is that although we can understand about all these things, ultimately everything is up to God. Whether you will be led to flee the Great Tribulation or not, it largely depends on whether you are the faithful follower of Jesus, you and your family. And another thing is, if you look at those 7 churches, the 5 churches, there are some who are the faithful followers, but there are others in the church who are at fault. So for God to be able to keep your church from going through the Great Tribulation, most of the church members have to be the true follower of Jesus. Because if a lot of church members in your church are not true followers, so that they have to be tested in the Great Tribulation, then God won't let your church be kept from the hour of trial. Because those church members who are not born again have to be tested in the Great Tribulation to be saved. So in order for God to keep your church from going through the Great Tribulation, most of your church members have to be the true follower of Jesus Christ. So if you haven't yet decided to follow Jesus, then understand that you might actually be a liability. You can be a liability to your church because of your indecision to follow Jesus. You are putting your church at risk of not fleeing from the Great Tribulation. So it's very important that you and all your family can decide to be a follower of Jesus Christ before all these things come. And please don't get this idea that when these things happen, I can just run away. Because for God to, as I explained, for God to remove you to His safe place from the Great Tribulation, all these things that I explained have to happen. So before Great Tribulation comes, you and your family needs to be guided by God to either start a church or join a church that is a true Philadelphia church, for God to be able to keep you from the Great Tribulation. Another thing about this is that why God determines our faith in relation to the churches we belong to. It's because of the current technology. Now, there are like thousands of satellites revolving around the earth. So if you just run away in the open, you will be easily tracked by all the satellites in the sky. So you need to flee to the enclosed space, or maybe a cave system, so that you will be concealed from the satellites. I think those caves are unknown somewhere, prepared for the Philadelphia churches in the end time from the beginning of time. And God needs to lead your church to that place. But if God has to work with each individual to flee, then it's not very efficient. I mean, if He has to provide the secret caves for each individual, it's not efficient. So God will provide these caves to the groups of individuals, which will be the churches. So that's why God is determining the fate according to all the churches you belong to. So I hope that you see this truth and ask guidance about what you should do for yourself and your family and your fellow Christians. And I wish you blessings from the Lord, that God will lead you in the days coming ahead. Only you can find the security in Him. Everything is up to Him. Although you believe all these things, ultimately everything is up to Him. If God wants you to do His work in Great Tribulation, then you have to do it. But if you understand these things, then you can ask God what you should do about it. And He is a God who is very gentle and compassionate. He is a God who granted Lot's wish when he asked to flee to the small city instead of the wilderness. Actually, God commanded Lot to flee to the mountain, but when Lot asked his permission to flee to the city, God granted his wishes. So our God is very gentle, and he is very diplomatic. So when you become a true follower of Jesus Christ and understand all about things, and then if you ask God's mercy for you and your family about the coming days, then I believe God will grant your wish, and I believe God will guide you during the perilous times in the end time. I wish you blessings from the Lord.